All right, this is the third in the series on the judiciary in check and balance. So I guess this is one of the last one. Maybe we're gonna have another one on independent agency, depending on whether we are able to cover it uh, when I'm back or not. Right. So today we're gonna continue from the choice of constitutional review body that we discussed in the last video. Now we are focusing on the case of Thailand. Let me share the PowerPoint with you. Right, so here we are. As I mentioned earlier in the previous video, that Thailand has experimented with all the four models that I presented, and nothing actually worked. I mean, partly partly that was because Thailand was actually under a very long period of like unfree or partially free or not so free regime of military backed administration, right? So in under that circumstance, very few people would uh, care about constitutionality of anything, right? Because uh, uh, I mean, obviously the constitution isn't supreme. It was the military dictatorship that was supreme, right? So that partly explained why all the three models failed. But also, I think that was because the all the three models lacked something in their design. I mean, there's inherent flaw in their own design, right? They couldn't guarantee independent. They couldn't guarantee professionalism. They couldn't guarantee that the review gonna be. I mean, the dispute gonna be reviewed by independent expert body. So a lot of people are discouraged from uh, using the venue. Right? So things changed in 1997. I mean, politically, there's a big change with the People's Constitution, and there's a renewed resolve uh, um, intention to institutionalize the Constitution. And in order to institutionalize the Constitution, you need a constitutional court as its guardian, right? So they decide to depart from the existing structure. They decide to assign the role of constitutional review to a new body, which is called a constitutional court. Of course, I mean, we know that uh, the design is a bit controversial at the beginning because it was a mix of legal and political experts. Some of them going to be like career judge, professional judges. Some of them are what we call like ad hoc uh, judges or lay judges. They invite outsider, someone with no legal training to sit on the panel as well. I mean, that's something the designer think that was necessary because it ensure that in any case, in any constitutional trial, all the legal and political factors will be taken into consideration. Right. So the jurisdiction can fall into three groups. So first of all, there's a judicial review of legislation, and that is you can call it a classical jurisdiction. This is the basic function that Kelsen and a lot of constitutional theorists imagine that the court has to do this duty. Sometimes, I mean, sometimes people called it a negative legislative power. Think about it this way: uh, a legislature, a legislative branch legislate a law, right? So positively, they are creating a law. Judicial review by the Constitutional Court invalidate them. So there's a kind of legislative power too, right? But instead of creating the law, uh, it invalidates the law. So it is a negative legislative power. Sometimes the Constitutional Court is called a negative legislator, right? So that is the most basic function of the Constitutional Court. Right? Originally, it was intended to review compatibility. So they try to check if the legislative processes follow a constitutional procedures prescribed in the law. Right? So they check if um, the legislature follow the procedures, there's debate and follow all the the review originally was pretty procedural. They just try to look for compliance, but later this function become more and more complicated because the court start looking into substantive issues. So rather than asking whether the legislature has complied with procedural safeguard as prescribed by the Constitution, uh, the court start looking into the merits, the substance of the law, and asking a more like a substantive question, like something like whether it violates the principle of gender equality or not. Does it violate like freedom of expression or not? Does it violate freedom of religion or not? So the court looks not only into a procedural aspect of the law, but also a substantive of the law. I mean, the side effect is that the court is plunging itself into a more controversial landscape, right? Instead of looking for compliance, the court now looking into ideology of the law, and sometimes the court gonna be accused of like asserting their own political preference when reviewing this law, right? So it's not compliance. It's asking something like whether the court looks at it and asking, is this liberal? Is it socialist? What does it mean to be a liberal society? You look at labor laws and the court asks, um, instead of asking about compliance, the court asks like, what does it mean to respect the freedom of contract? Can the court or the government intervene in the unfair contract of employment? It becomes a matter of ideologies and principles, not just like just rule keeping. It become more complicated in that sense, right? The second jurisdiction is to settle constitutional disputes. So there's a lot of disputes other than legislative dispute, right? So there's a dispute, for example, eligibility of political office holders, prime minister, ministers, MPs. So for example, the court has to rule on conflict of interest, whether the prime minister has conflict of interest when he enter into a deal doing this and that, blah, blah, blah. Uh, uh, Something like whether the prime minister's term has already expired under the constitution. What does it mean to have an honest characteristic? Or what does it mean that like the prime minister must never be imprisoned? Kun Thamarat, for example, he's a minister, right? And he had been imprisoned in Australia for drug smuggling. There's a debate whether like imprisonment in the imprisonment clause in the constitution include imprisonment abroad or only just imprisonment according to the Thai court's order, right? So a lot of disputes, mostly on jurisdictional dispute between organizations or bodies, and also eligibilities, conduct, conflict of interest, corruption, stuff, right? Um, the court has to look into it. So in this sense, the court is not a negative legislator, right? Not only a negative legislator. Now the court is a final adjudicator, right? So if there's a dispute, sometimes you can settle the dispute politically. You refer the case to the parliament, and the parliament gonna vote on it, right? But like it doesn't always work. If you refer it to the parliament, most of the time the majority gonna win regardless of the merit. So people start referring the case to the constitutional court, believing that the court will rule not according to majority position, but the court gonna rules according to the like legal theories and constitutional interpretation. Right? So and of course, I mean the court is final. Remember the res judicata of finality that we mentioned 2 videos earlier, right? So uh, that is what the court is, right? The final arbiter or the final adjudicator of disputes. Whenever you have a dispute and you couldn't settle it, right? You look at the court and you ask the court to settle it for you, and in this case, the the adjudication, the outcome is binding, legally binding. Everyone has to follow. So uh, that's the second function of the constitutional court is to settle constitutional disputes. The last one going to be the safeguard of the regime. So whatever type of regime, right? So some of them like democratic regime with the king as the head of state. That is what Thailand is, right? Um, Socialist democratic regime, or it can be like a theocratic state, is Islamic state, or in case of Israel, it is described as a Jewish and democratic state. All these are like fundamental characteristic of each state, and like of what type of regime they are, and of course, it means from time to time there's threat to the survival of the regime, to the face of the regime, and in that case, the constitutional court is expected to safeguard the regime and their fundamental values from the attack. The court might ask that person to stop their conduct and their activity. The court might order party dissolution to the party. Imagine Germany, for example, during leading up to the Second World War, it was gradually changing from socialist democratic society into a more and more authoritarian society through the rise of Nazi party, right? Uh, that's a classic example because Karl Lowenstein, he's another German or Austrian legal philosopher, proposed that actually, if if there were a constitutional court at that time, they could order the Nazi party to stop their activity, like raising hatred and cracking down on minority or curbing the right of dissent media, for example, right? And that's the way to safeguard the regime and prevent Germany from entering into the Second World War and committing Holocaust. It didn't happen, but Lowenstein proposed that, and and I think nowadays it become another fundamental function of the constitutional court is to safeguard the regime, right, from attack and threats. I mean, in details, you can go through uh, more detailed reading of the jurisdiction and go section by section, but it changed from time to time from constitution to another constitution. But basically, in every constitution, most of the jurisdiction dispute type gonna be able to be divided into 3 groups like this. I mean, so you can see the court merely as like a compliant officer, but sometimes you can see the court as an umpire setting up dispute. Sometimes you can see it as like a security guard of the regime. So depending on what kind of disputes arising. Of course, I mean, not always nice and dandy for Thai Constitutional Court, right? So from 1997, did a per it did a stellar job for quite a few years. I mean, a bit conservative, but also deliver several good decisions as well. But fast forward to 2026, and if I ask you guys to rate the Constitutional Court of Thailand, I remember asking other classes out of 10, how much you're gonna rate the Constitutional Court of Thailand, and most of them give like six. That's max. Uh, 3, 5, 6. So they're not rated any highly, right? So that indicate a lot of problems. A lot of them are chronic problem as well to the court. I think starting from 2006, start the court's reputation start going downhill um, through a series of court decisions. The court relentlessly attack and harass certain political parties and factions, while at the same time the court uphold the legality of a coup d'etat, of a junta. Eventually, I think what we are witnessing is like so it's very difficult to I mean, if someone asks you how well is the Thai Constitutional Court doing, the answer really depends on who you are talking to. Like, it become quite controversial. Some of Thai people really hate the Constitutional Court or have like a lot of distrust in the court. But at the same time, some of Thai people rely heavily on Constitutional Court to as an instrument to political victory to defeat their rivals and so I think what we experience is like a K-shaped graph, right? So for one group of people, uh, the trust in the court is going up, and in another group, the trust in the court just sinks. Right? So actually, as I say, like the assessment of the court depends on to whom you are talking. But I think in all fairness, I mean, just the fact that the opinion is divided about the court indicates that the court is very problematic right now in a big in a deep in a deep trouble, right? And that trouble, I mean, you can go into details, but I'm confident that you have another class on modern Thai political history. So in that class, I believe you're gonna go through details of what we call warfare, lawfare or judicial activism, right? The 20 years period in Thai politics where the court like dissolve political parties and remove politicians, right? And invalidate general elections and affirms legality of two coup d'etats. There's a less stellar side of the Thai Constitutional Court. But I would like to focus this video on the problem of accountability itself rather than details of political development in Thailand. Right? So what we are witnessing with the Thai Constitutional Court is the problem of accountability. Right? This is very ironic, but because the court was there in the first place to impose accountability on other constitutional bodies, eventually the court suffers its own lack of accountability, right? The classic uh, dilemma of who watches the watchman, right? So the court watching over everyone and no one watching over the court. So eventually the court drifts, right? The court start acting erratically. The court start behaving arbitrarily, right? So what I want to point out is that um, the logic when you approach the court is actually very different from from when you approach political branches, and that comes down to two different modes of command or control that any constitutional designer think about when they draft a constitution, right? So in the normal situation in a political branch or administrative branches, we mostly talk about principal agent relationship. This is something that we have already covered, right? So the first principle going to be the people, and through an election, they vote for the parliament, and the parliament appoint appoint the executive, the cabinet, and the cabinet uh, appoint the whole bureaucracy. So there's a clear change of command, and that change of command is constantly checked, right? Because you have an election every 4 years, and throughout the period of 4 years, actually, the MPs is in contact with the people, and so if any error happen in the system, it is expected that the people can raise concern and the MP has to react. And when the MP react, the cabinet gonna react, and when the cabinet react, I mean uh, they're gonna um, assert control over their agent, the final agent, the bureaucrats or the civil servants, right? So in that case, you can see that the control is there. And that is how we understand how democracy functions. Right? The people is there, and can the people assert certain control, I mean, more or less control over uh, different offices, different bodies through their election and through the principal agent relationship. Somehow people has like more or less control over things. But the court is different. As I say, this is not a political branch. The court emphasize a lot on independence. Right? So uh, imagine that when the court is about to adjudicate a certain case, right? Um, I don't think we like it if the outcome of the case can be dictated by the vote of the people. You feel that that is not how law operates. Law has their own logics, and the law have their own principles, and right or wrong, I mean, the outcome of the case should be determined by the law, right? By legal interpretation and reasoning, not by the vote of the people. I mean, if you remember in the philosophy class, that was how Socrates died, right? A lot of people know that he was innocent, but the court of the Athenian people sentenced him to death. Right? So there's an arbitrariness of the court by the public opinion, and that's not how like a modern court operates anyway. Right? So we understand that the principal agent relationship doesn't work here, doesn't work with the court. The court is operating under a very different model, what we call trusteeship. This is something that a bit foreign to a lot of Thai students. Even Thai legal students will struggle with that. But trusteeship is, so what is trusteeship? Right? So trusteeship is so the emphasis is on trust. Like, so when you appoint a person or an entity to act for your benefit, not on your behalf, but for your benefit. But they are isolated from your control or from your command. Well, take politicians for example. A lot of politicians have the stocks and shares and assets, right? But when they enter into politics, they are asked not to dispose of their asset, but to put their asset in a trust, this trust. And this trust gonna hold properties and and perform for their benefit, for the beneficiaries' benefit, right? But the owner of the asset has no command or control over the trustee. A more funny, a more light-hearted example would be if you have a cat, you really love your cat, and somehow you want to you are on your deathbed and you want to like give all your testimony, your estate to the cat. That's not that's not possible under the law. I mean, beneficiary has to be a person, but you can set up a trust. You put all your asset into a trust, and that trust is dedicated to your cat, something like that. Okay, so there's a way. I mean, if you plan to die as a lonely cat person, just remember that there's always a way to look after your cat after you pass away. Okay. Anyhow, that's how we should understand the court. Right? Uh, the the delegation happened only once when the constitution is enacted. So you set up a court, and the court get trust and the delegation of power, and the court operate independently from the people. I mean, they're gonna operate for the benefit of the people. The people is the beneficiary of the court, but the people doesn't have any control. So the people cannot dictate the outcome of the case. The people cannot say, "Oh, I'm a sovereign." Like sovereignty belongs to the people, so I want the court to rule this and that. I mean, that's not how it works. I mean, the court gonna say something like, "All right, you are the sovereign. Like sovereignty belongs to you guys, but I'm acting for your own benefit, but you assert no control here." And that's for your own benefit too, that you are not able to mess up with the court's operation. Right? But the thing is here, like trusteeship model relies a lot on trust. And the problem with Thai court right now is that I think people don't have enough trust in the court because the past performance of the court raised doubt about the court's partiality, independence, and and professionalism. Right? So these are three vocabularies that sometimes like people conflate them. Right? So a lot of time people talk about independence, as I say, like independence from political influence or from political oversight. That's something you want the court to be, right? You want the court to be independent from all the undue influence that might tamper with the outcome of the case, right? But at the same time, I mean, uh, I think people tend to forget that if you have complete or total independence, right, then what's going to happen, right? A lot of oftentimes people talk about independence as if it is the end in itself. Right? The court should be independent because independence is good, but you don't really inquire like why independence is good. I mean, and that I think is a big mistake. I want to point out here that actually we should think of independence as a mean to a different end. So independence is not an end in itself, but independent. We want the court to be independent because we want the court to be. I mean, I mean, one of the ends that we want the court to be is we want the constitutional court to be professional. You want the court to be professional, so like they like a good lawyer. So you ask politicians to stop messing with the court. You ask politicians to stop threatening the court, but also you ask politicians to stop trying to bribe the court, right? So the court can rule on the merit according to the law and law only. That is professionalism. Right? Uh, so that's the end. Independence is just a means, and professionalism is actually an end, right? Another end that we should really consider is impartiality, right? Uh, the court should know the law, but the court should be able to exercise the knowledge of the law, uh, right? Uh, not for the benefit of certain people, but I mean they should do it fairly, right? So that's that's what impartiality is all about. The court is impartial. The court shouldn't become part of the conflict in order for the court to solve the conflict. If effectively, the court has to be isolated from the conflict, and that's the idea of impartiality. If the court taking side, if the court is biased or prejudiced, right, it really hurts the court's reputation or credibility. And in that sense, I mean, people lost trust in the court, and you're going to be in big trouble. So, to the question of what should we expect from the judiciary, I think, yeah, definitely we should uh, insist on independence, but we have to keep in mind that we should also assess whether that independence gonna lead to professionalism and impartiality or not. The problem with Thai court is that they emphasize is solely on independence, and professionalism and impartiality uh, are not discussed as often as it should have been. Uh, so the downside when you give the court absolute freedom to do whatever and there's no accountability at all is that the court gonna start acting erratically. Maybe quality of the decision gonna drop, or worse come to worse, the court taking side and no one can do anything about it because you, I mean, the constitution drafter didn't consider that problem when they draft or when they design the system. And I think that's what we are witnessing right now in Thai politics. Right? And I can say that uh, this problem is also applicable to the independent agencies that we're going to discuss in our next class as well. Right, so that is the third video in our series of chord and check and balance. So see you in either next video or next class. Good luck.